right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another webinar here at Route Consultant. My name is Josh Gregory. I am the Vice President of Education here. For those of you who've never been here before, these webinars are designed to teach you how kind of be a space where we can all come together and learn, whether you're a new investor looking at the space for the first time, or you've been here for 20 years and you're still coming here so that you can learn new things from others who are in the space, learn best practices, and try to get better at the craft that we do every day. So before I go too far, I just quickly have to read a disclaimer as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. So the same disclaimer I always have to read. Now, again, if you've never been here before, the way that today's going to work is we are going to go through a bunch of content, some things that we want to inform everybody about that's new, new listings, new events that are coming up. And then we're going to kick it over and open it up into pure Q&A at the end. So any questions you have, whether it's about something we talk about today or anything about the FedEx space, the Amazon space, logistics space as a whole that you have, me and Jesse are going to be here at the end to answer any questions anyone has. So no wrong questions you can ask here. We'll make sure to address those at the end of today. So as I'm talking, you can go ahead and enter those questions and we'll get to them at the end, or you can save them until I open it up for Q&A. But regardless, wherever you ask it, make sure that you type it into the Q&A box at the bottom. If you put it in that chat button at the bottom, I'm going to miss it. So make sure you type it in to the Q&A button if you want me to answer it. So today, what we're going to be talking about, over the last few weeks and years, we've talked about a bunch of different investment opportunities. We used to be all FedEx. We started talking about Amazon, and recently we started talking about bread as well. So what we wanted to do today is talk about each of them kind of at a high level and help everyone think through what the opportunities are in each of them and kind of help differentiate between them and help you decide if you're a new investor trying to get into the space, or if you're a current contractor trying to figure out where you want to differentiate, what the best place is for you. So Jesse and I are going to go through each of them, and I'm actually going to go ahead and bring Jesse on now because Jesse's going to talk about the first couple, which is kind of differentiating between P&D and line haul in the FedEx space. So Jesse, I'll kick it over to you, and then I'll pick it up in a little bit.
Thanks, Josh. Hey, everybody. Great to be back on another webinar. So I'm going to sell you on either P&D or line haul, and then Josh's going to take the other ones. But FedEx, as many of you know, is where I cut my teeth, specifically in the last mile side, the P&D side. So it's funny, when we get to our new investor summits, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll kind of have a competition of when I do my P&D operations presentation, I'm competing with whoever's doing our line haul operations to try to get more clients to buy P&D, and they're trying to take them away to sell them on line haul. So I have to give both sides of the coin today. So I'm going to try to be as fair as I can, but you're probably going to see my bias here in a few places. But here's the general overview for P&D versus line haul in the FedEx silo. So when you're looking at P&D, as I said, this is the last mile space. When the truck shows up at your door with the box, the driver comes and gives you your box, that's your P&D drivers, right? So this is going to be something where you're contracted to run a specific territory. You got a set of zip codes, maybe a partial zip code, things like that. Line haul is going to be the sort of the middle and first mile part of the network. And that's a very crude way of putting it, but it's basically the over-the-road part, getting the stuff from the distribution hubs to the last mile terminals where they then go out on the FedEx vehicles, the P&D vehicles, to get to the front door of their final destination. And so if you're in the middle of that process, you've got the tractors that are pulling the freight between the hubs or hubs to stations. That's line haul. So that's kind of the overview of the two main categories here. Now, specifically, I'm going to kind of hit one after the other, kind of go rapid fire here. So Josh, if I go too fast, just stop me and we'll go back. So I want to hit margins first, because that's the big one that a lot of people look at first and foremost. Where am I going to make more money? Well, the answer, as it is going to be for all of these categories, is, well, it depends. But in general, I'm going to give you some ranges here. On the P&D side, you can expect margins of about 10 to 25%. Big ol' asterisk on the side of that one, which I'll get to in a second, but 10 to 25% is where the vast majority of the contracts that we see and evaluate are worth. They're somewhere, that NOI is somewhere in the 10 to 25% range. And then on the line haul side, it's a little bit higher. It's 20 to 45%. And there's reasons for that. The line haul is in some sense much more risk that you're taking on. I mean, the tractors are much bigger. The safety incidents are much more impactful when they do happen. You know, a semi gets in an accident on the interstate, you're taking on a lot of risk there. So there's more reward there, but there's in some sense fewer things you can do to affect that, which I'll get into here in a second. But in general, those are the margin ranges. When it comes to the daily operations, that's another thing that a lot of people want to know about. Do I want to go into a P&D space where I'm, got 100 different little levers here that I'm trying to manipulate and keep my hand on top of all of them, or line haul where basically I own the runs, the drivers show up and they go do their miles and they take the trailer from point A to point B, and I basically just sit back and let it happen. Obviously, that's very much in a nutshell, but in general, that's kind of the contrast, right? You've got a lot of different plates spinning on the P&D side, but they're all small. On the line haul side, you got just a couple of really big plates spinning. So if one of those breaks, you're seriously in danger of, a lot of pieces of your business will kind of be in a domino effect behind that. And so you got to really be aware that it's almost completely variable revenue. In fact, it is completely variable revenue on the line haul side. So if you meet your contractual obligations, you're going to make gobs of money. On the P&D side, even if you have a rough service day, you're still guaranteed a certain amount of fixed money you're going to get no matter what. The next thing I would say is that the revenue on the P&D side is based on stops, or stop density is another way we could say it. So the more stops in a geographic area that you have, and the more stops per hour you can incentivize your drivers to cover, the better resource efficiency that you're going to have on the P&D side, and the better money you're going to make on that route. And then on the line haul side, it's all based on the miles that your tractors drive. Bottom line is, if your wheels aren't moving on your tractors, you are not making money. Period. Now, the thing is, when we use the term sometimes, you want to buy a FedEx route. Well, anymore, there's really no such thing as a FedEx route singular. So when we say that, that's kind of just a convention of the industry that we use. But when we're talking about a FedEx route, we actually mean a set of routes, a set of zip codes, as I mentioned before. And on the P&D side, one thing I want to highlight that's different than line haul is that when you have a set of routes, you control the number of routes that is. So in other words, you get a volume projection from FedEx on a day-to-day basis, and they say you've got 1,000 stops in your zip code tomorrow. You can decide whether you want to service that with 8 trucks, 10 trucks, 14 trucks, 20 trucks. You can decide how many trucks you want and drivers to go out and service that volume. Needless to say, the fewer resources you put on the road, more money you're going to make, because you're paying fewer drivers and you're having less wear and tear, less fuel costs going out on the resources that you are deploying. So you have a tremendous amount of control over the optimization and the efficiency and then the net operating income of your business. If you know how to run a P&D business well, you have the upside potential that is pretty spectacular. Then on the line haul side, again, it's not so much that you can pull levers and say, well, I'm going to make my runs more efficient. If you're going from Denver to Sacramento, there's a best way to get there. And then there's all the other ways, right? So, I mean, if you want to run the best fuel mileage and keep your fuel costs down and take the most direct route, then there's pretty much just one way to do it. And so the money is the money. So if you can show up with a driver in a truck, you're going to make money. Now, it's not to say there's not other little operational levers you can pull using the right fuel strategy, the right fuel card and stuff like that. But in general, if all else being equal, you don't have a whole lot of control over optimizing your business on the line haul side like you do on the P&D side. Another thing I want to mention is the insurance cost, the indemnity cost specifically. So you have to have similar types of insurance on both sides of the coin, whether it's P&D and line haul. You have to have non-trucking liability, which is a kind of industry-specific term we can talk about more if anyone wants to know about that. You have to have, well, I guess you don't have to have physical damage insurance on your trucks, but why would you not want to? You have to have workers' comp, and you have to have employment practice liability insurance. And so those are kind of the big buckets that you have to have. FedEx takes the primary liability costs off you as a FedEx contractor on the P&D side and on the line haul side. But there's a big catch here. On the line haul side, because the incidents they eat up so much more of the liability costs and such bigger judgments when there is a major catastrophic accident with the FedEx tractor, the liability costs on the line haul side are significant. So you could be indemnified up to $75,000. In other words, you will have to contribute towards FedEx's liability deductible up to $75,000. And that is worst case if you're not operating safely, if you don't have safety equipment installed. That's if certain things are not met that you're contractually required to do. And then on the P&D side, the worst penalty you would get in terms of indemnity is only $10,000. So big difference there. Now, again, when it comes to accidents and safety, there's a whole lot more we can say on both sides, but those are kind of the two big differences in terms of indemnity and liability. And man, some people hear that $75,000, they're like, oh my goodness, I don't want to go anywhere near that. Again, that's a pretty extreme example, but just to let you know, those are kind of the top ends of what you can expect to pay from an indemnity perspective when there's safety incidents. A couple more things here. Repairs on the P&D side for your vehicles are much less expensive, but more common. And then it's the opposite on the line haul side. They're not nearly as common for the most part. Tractors are pretty reliable going over the road, getting highway miles. But when they do happen, they have zeros attached to them. It's hard to get into a lot of line haul repairs for under $1,000. You can get tires and stuff and oil changes and stuff less than that, but it's much more expensive than on the P&D side, where there's mostly a lot of gas vehicles. Repairs are much cheaper. All of your line haul tractors, 100% of them will be diesels, and diesel mechanics, as you may or may not know, are not cheap in this country. So you will pay a lot more to get your tractors repaired than your P&D vans. On the P&D side, you have a massive peak season. So when December, anytime after Black Friday rolls around, it is game on the P&D side. Now, you have a lot of ramp-up costs associated with that. You got to train new drivers. You got to secure rental vehicles to handle the increased volume. Because you were contracted to service a particular territory. So whether the volume is this much or boxes are stacked to the ceiling, you have to deliver every box that comes into your territory. So needless to say, peak season is pretty massive. There's a lot of upside potential there. If you manage it right, it can be a huge windfall for people. And then on the line haul side, it's a little different. Your runs are your runs 12 months out of the year. Now, FedEx offers you the opportunity to earn peak mileage threshold bonuses. So if you run a certain number of miles on average throughout the year, FedEx says, okay, if you can give us an extra 500 miles this week or whatever it is on top of your norm, then we'll pay you a bonus premium amount per mile to service these extra trailers that we have because of the increased volume of peak season. But the thing is, you can say no. You don't have to take it. So a peak season for a line haul contractor who wants to stay flat and they just want their December to look normal and they don't want to hire extra people, you can absolutely do that. So just be aware, you will, though, have more pressure on you from your hubs and terminals to say, hey, we really need some power to get this trailer moved. Can you do it? The upsides could be significant if you manage it right. But again, you're not contractually obligated to do that. Last couple things here. There's daytime operations on the P&D side. You don't have any overnight type of routes. It's not to say your drivers won't ever be out past dark, but they don't ever have to run what's called a PM run. On the line haul side, you may or may not have that. There's runs that go 24/7, 365. So it really depends on what your run portfolio looks like on the line haul side. You may or may not have PM runs, but just be aware that if you do, somebody is going to need to be awake to take the calls of the drivers who are out there on the roads needing something done at 3:15 in the morning and no one else is awake. You better have somebody awake who can get on the phone with a hub saying, hey, why can't my driver hook up to the trailer? Well, it's not loaded yet. Well, we need to get this loaded because my driver needs to get on the road. You got to have somebody able to take those calls for you. And then the last thing is going to be the geography of it. So as I mentioned, all of your operations for a single P&D business are going to be in a single adjacent contiguous geographic region. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not large. I've dealt with a contractor recently that operates out of Amarillo, Texas. His routes go all the way across the New Mexico border. So he does some serious miles, but all of his routes touch each other. So he's got an area where all of his routes are generally together. So no driver is driving more than about 100 miles in any one direction. With line haul, you might have a run that literally spans the country, goes from Nashville to Portland, Oregon, right? So you've got drivers literally across the United States. If that's what your run portfolio looks like, you can have more regional, local runs if you want. But the bottom line is you could have drivers anywhere in the country at any given point. So Josh, as we know, we could say so much more about both of these, but that's kind of my general overview. Did I stay fair on those?
Look, I muted myself. There we go. Yeah. So yes, you did. I didn't detect too much bias there. So I appreciate that. Okay. So we will, if you have any questions on that in the Q&A, we'll go through it if you have additional questions there, but I'm going to talk about a couple other options first. So I'm going to talk about Amazon first. So really quickly, for those of you who aren't as familiar with Amazon, who may not have heard of it, there's actually a lot of similarities between the Amazon model and the FedEx model. And specifically here, I'm talking about the Amazon DSP model. And it looks a lot like the FedEx P&D model. So a lot of what you'll be doing in this space when you're looking at these industries that are fairly similar is translation between all of the different ways that Amazon calls something and FedEx calls something, and they may mean the same thing, but it's different abbreviations. So that's some of what you're going to be doing as you're trying to understand the two. For now, in the Amazon DSP space, you're a contractor still receiving packages from an Amazon terminal, so that looks the same. The contracted area does look a little different, though. So with FedEx, you have exclusive rights to a set of zip codes, and with Amazon, you have operating rights in a more general market. So you might service an area like South Nashville or North Nashville, and it may not be specifically tied to zip codes. So with that, there's some fairly significant daily and weekly fluctuations in volume based on what Amazon needs. And they'll basically be telling you how many routes and how many drivers they need from you in a specific area. And Amazon is actually the one that makes the decisions around how many routes to dispatch. So they're doing all of the optimizing in their systems and then just letting you know how many employees to provide. And so that's different than the way FedEx looks, where you control DRO and you're making those decisions yourself. Amazon is also providing the trucks through a lease system and reimbursing you for fuel. So there is, it looks different in that sense, in that Amazon is providing a lot more to you as the contractor. The contract also renews each year, assuming you've kind of maintained your contractual requirements, and you're paid a monthly base rate along with a calculation done by Amazon called the hourly base rate that's tied to the number of routes you dispatch and the number of hours worked. Now, the biggest real factor to be paying attention to and aware of on the Amazon side is that you're graded on a variety of factors. And there is kind of a similar system called the metal system in the FedEx space. But with Amazon, if you're in the top couple of tiers, which have kind of funny names, Fantastic and Fantastic Plus, you get an additional bonus each week. And it's not a trivial amount. If you really want to be successful and profitable in the Amazon space, you need to be in these tiers, because those additional bonuses each week can be as much as $15,000 or more. So it is a good chunk of profitability, where the best contractors are in those tiers. And especially if you can maintain those tiers during peak season at the end of the year or peak season in the summer, because if you are an Amazon orderer, as my family is, there's Prime days that happen throughout the year, not just during the Christmas seasons. And those Prime days are huge spikes in volume as well. And so if you can maintain your high tiers during those high points in the season, you're getting a lot of additional bonus. So if you're looking at getting in the Amazon space, there's a couple of things that I want you to be aware of to help kind of determine if it's the right fit for you. The first is that for Amazon, more than ever with FedEx, they really want you to be more on-site and involved in the business. And so there are some markets where they're beginning to allow you to scale to multiple locations. But for the most part, you should expect that your first opportunity in this space is going to either need to be something that's close to where you live right now, or it's somewhere you're willing to move and be close to those operations. Amazon does do a lot more, though, to train you on the operations before you take over, along with providing more of that technology and reporting that I mentioned. So if you're trying to get into the logistics for the first time, sometimes Amazon is an easier on-ramp, because it's one where they're actually going to help you learn the space. And maybe you start with Amazon and you get into FedEx because they'll do that training for you, because they care more about your ability to grow and recruit a team and also to maintain safe operations than they care about how much you know about how to operationally run one of these businesses. They think they can teach you some of that. But that's also why they give such great bonuses if you can maintain those high safety tiers. Now, at the same time, though, one of the challenges about Amazon is actually getting into the space. So there's a couple of different ways you can get in. The first is that there is an application process through their portal. And it can be great. It's essentially a $0 price point, or as low as $10,000. There's some startup costs there, but the challenge is that wait list. As you can imagine, there's a lot of people who are interested in that low of a price point. And so when you enter that application process, you'll put down a couple of locations that are interesting for you. And let's say one of those comes up. If you say no, because maybe that was your third choice and you can't actually move there right now, then you'll go to the back of the line. And so a lot of people are waiting months or years before they ever get an opportunity here, and it may not even be the right location for them. The other way is to purchase an Amazon business, same as the FedEx, and that is an option. And it's a way in which you'll get to also inherit those existing employees and that existing culture. And with Amazon, you'll often see much larger employee bases than what you'll see on the FedEx side. And so that can be a pretty significant starting block that you're overcoming by inheriting a full business. You're also going to have a much clearer understanding of the profitability instead of starting from scratch. And importantly, it lets you guarantee your location, which, as I talked about, that's one of the most important factors to determining if you'll be successful in the Amazon space at all. Now, profitability wise, you're going to see very similar to the FedEx space that Jesse mentioned. So 10 to 25%, and really those higher margins, even potentially above 25%, have to come from those contractors in the fantastic and fantastic plus range that I mentioned earlier. But since Amazon is a little bit of a newer space, not significantly newer space as compared to FedEx in terms of how long it's been in operations, those multiples are lower. So if you're looking at getting into the space, oftentimes those price points are lower than what you'll see in the FedEx space, even for a larger business than what you would see in the FedEx space. I will say, though, that bank funding is more difficult on the Amazon side because, as I mentioned, all those vehicles are leased, and so there's no real hard assets to back it up, and it's a newer space. So if you're getting into Amazon, expect some kind of cash seller financing type of deal that you'll need to work out there if you're getting into that space. Now, before I want to move on from Amazon, I just want to quickly highlight that there is actually a line haul option on the Amazon side as well. It's called the Amazon Freight Partner Program, so the AFP program. It is also a contractor model. They currently are only running solos, so there's no team runs, there's no two drivers in the vehicles. And the structure of the contract does differ from the way the FedEx contract is structured. There's tons of detail there I won't go into right now. But they do also still have that similar ranking system, the Fantastic and Fantastic Plus, where you can get additional revenue. And it is also substantial there, as much as 4% profitability that I've seen coming from those in the higher tiers. The trucks are also covered as well. Repair and maintenance and fuel is reimbursed. Importantly, this is a relatively new program, only about 3 years, and they are not taking a ton of applicants right now. So this is one that's pretty hard to get into right now. It's something you can apply and maybe pay attention to, but particularly if you're already a line haul contractor on the FedEx side, or if you soon will be, I would keep a close eye on that AFP space because it's a really interesting opportunity and there's a lot of interesting profitability there. And the idea of not having to run the vehicles, there's lots of good there. It's just right now it's hard to get into it, but I would be doing everything I can to be in that pipeline and make sure that I'm also trying to get an opportunity there as well. So that's Amazon. So the last one that I want to talk about here is the newest one that we've mentioned recently, which is the bread space. Now, we've done a few webinars on it that you can go back and watch, but in short, bread routes are where you've contracted with a bakery to deliver their products to all the stores in a particular geographic area. So you'll know your stops, you'll know what products those stores expect on their shelves, and you'll know how much products that the store sold historically. So it's your job to just make sure that the shelves are stocked and that the inventory is fresh. You need to know what sells where, and when it sells. And so those are your keys to proper inventory management and maximizing your return in the space. So there's a lot of things that feel really similar. You're still starting at a hub location, picking up your product and delivering it to the stops in an area in the same way you might with FedEx or Amazon. You're also going to be paid a commission rate. That's how you're paid in the bread space. So you get a percentage of the total product that you sell each week. So if you can sell more product, you make more money. which is different than FedEx and Amazon. And this is one of the only ones that we're talking about where you have the ability to control your top line. All the others, Amazon and FedEx, is more so about controlling your efficiency and maximizing your profitability in that way. There's the same with Bread, but Bread also has some capability of increasing your top line. So if you can either secure more stops in your territory that make product, or like I said, just sell more at the stops you already have, that is more revenue for you directly. Now, when it comes to Bread, I think it's really important to be clear about the mindset and involvement that you're going to need to have for this space. Most of the operators today just have one route and they run it themselves. So most listings that you'll see in this space come from an owner operator doing everything themselves. For some of you, that might be appealing. It is a small business that you can control the grind and the outcome. And so I think that is a really attractive thing for a lot of you. For some of you, though, you're looking for a business that doesn't require you to be driving or working in the business. So there's maybe some Bread opportunities that don't fit for you. But I do want to say that there are Bread opportunities that it is possible to not be as active in the day-to-day. I know larger operators, of course, that are up in the 10 to 20 route range and are nowhere near a truck. But even I know contractors that are only 2 routes and they don't drive either of the routes. And they're still throwing off really high margins. I've seen some over 30%, even in those where they have a driver. So there is opportunity here, but you'll just need to and want to be more involved than in the FedEx space or even the Amazon space to really maximize your profit. So I just want to be clear about that when you're looking at these opportunities. Now, the entry point for Bread, the price points are significantly lower. We're talking, on average between $75,000 and $275,000. And the other nice thing is that for a lot of these, the bakeries will actually finance. So a good chunk, if not all of the price, can be financed directly from the bakery. And maybe you just close that gap with either cash or seller financing. So you don't have to work through a bank and some of those normal challenges there. And that can make actually securing the funds for this really easy. On the margin side, we see margins, some that are in the lower side, but I see as high as 30%. I see higher than 30% for those that are driving it themselves. So this is back to in the FedEx days, for those of you who, 10, 15 years ago, who used to see those types of margins. You can see that in the Bread where, 40% or higher, I've seen it on some of these P&Ls. There are just very few expenses that you have to deal with in the Bread routes. And really, it's an unregulated, unoptimized space, which when I say unregulated, so the bakery is not like FedEx or Amazon where they're putting a ton of safety requirements on you. There's no technology requirements on you. And there aren't any real background check requirements that are in depth to bring employees in. So you have an immense amount of control over your expenses and your revenue stream while still working in an industry that's pretty recession proof and avoids a lot of the challenges of traditional retail. And when I say unoptimized, a lot of this is the same way it's been run for a long time, where there's few people that are bringing any real, extensive business or technology to the space. And so that leaves a huge opportunity for those who are getting in for the first time to look for ways to improve what's already there. So if you're looking for something where you can get in at a lower price point, there's very few barriers to entry, and you can really have the ability to control more of your revenue and then grow it through marketing to new stores, then the Bread space could be the one that's the right fit for you. Now, on the whole, any of these could be the right starting point, and any of them could also be an excellent diversification option afterwards. It's not always linear. Sometimes there's some diagonal moves and some back and forth that you'll go through in this space. And what I would say on the whole is that, a lot of this is going to transfer. The logistics of scheduling the routes will feel similar across the board. There's lots of skills and experience that are going to transfer among all of these. There's really fantastic ways where you can utilize the same trucks, the same drivers across all of your operations to generate additional revenue. For example, it's pretty easy to convert a vehicle that's used in the last mile delivery space to be one that's capable of delivering Bread. And it's also really smooth in terms of training and qualification if you're taking somebody from delivery to Bread, because there's no one to really qualify them. It's as trained as you want them to be. And in general, there's no real safety or compliance requirements to bring those drivers across. I also know people who use drivers from FedEx over on Amazon and vice versa. There's some things you have to be aware of there, and trucks as well. But just know that it's not just starting fresh in each of these industries. there are a lot of efficiencies of scale that you can take advantage of as you look to diversify beyond just the one you started with. So we covered a lot today. So if you have any questions on these, let us know in the Q&A. We're going to get to it in just a second. A couple of just quick things I want to highlight before we get there. So as I'm talking through these, feel free to blast us on the Q&A in just a second, and Jesse and I will answer them. Now, one new listing this week to talk about, and it's out of Maine. It is 4 line haul runs at $900,000. It has a dedicated solo run and 3 unassigned solos. And there's also spots as well. And it's one that could be run remotely. So if that's one that you're interested in, you don't have to live in Maine. You can live, there's a few different places you can live and still be far or close enough to that terminal. Line haul doesn't require you to be as local as Jesse mentioned. Last thing is just on the event side. We have one event left this year in person for us. So we do these investor summits every year, and we have one left. So if you're interested in the investor summit, we have one on December 4th and 5th in our office in Nashville. And if you've never heard of these before, these summits are basically just 2-day crash courses where we try to teach you as much as we possibly can about the FedEx space and help you decide if that's the right industry for you. So if coming out of today, you're still on the fence of, well, I think it's FedEx, maybe it's P&D, maybe it's line haul. That's what those 2 days are designed, is let us just teach you, and by the end of the 2 days, a little bit of your brain will be leaking out your ears. But the goal of it is that you've learned as much as you can, where at the end of it, you can make that decision. We've also posted all of the locations that we'll be traveling next year for all of our happy hours. So if you want to see if we're coming into your area, we've posted that full calendar of events. And those happy hours are times for us to meet in person. It's going to be free drinks, free food, and it's just anybody in the area who wants to come out and meet other sellers, other contractors, other buyers, whatever it is, or if you just want to meet us, we'll all be there in person. We've also got our expo open for next year. And so the expo is our giant party that we have every year, where we have contractors from across the country, multiple industries, all come together in one place. Again, it's free to attend, and the food and the drink are free. You just have to make sure you get there. And importantly, make sure you book a hotel room, because those are selling out. And so we have a link where it's still the discounted hotel rooms. So if you're interested in attending next year and it's in Dallas the first week of August, then make sure you go ahead and book that hotel room. Okay, so let's get over to the questions. So first one here, I'll let you address it, Jesse. So what impact does the new UPS union contract have on FedEx?
I haven't seen a whole lot of impact just yet, Josh. Obviously, driver wages have been kind of the first thing that we've seen a little bit of trending in, but it's nothing in my view. I mean, I've been a driver for close to 20 years now. It's pretty much stayed in terms of normal driver wages. It's stayed on a fairly stable course, and I haven't seen the UPS contract change that a whole lot. And as I mentioned on the webinar before, I've said it on different places before. Really, it's 2 very different jobs. At FedEx Ground, I mean, you're really in charge of your own destiny as a driver, and that's one thing I love about it. You can go in and run your route, and when you're done, you're done. And there's not a high chance in most cases that you're going to get called to go, fill a certain number of hours or make sure you get a certain number of stops. It's just pretty much your route is your route. And then, on the UPS side, there's kind of, yes, you do have the expectation of a lot more money in that union security and those benefits, but at the same time, you're also expected to put in a pretty crazy amount of hours. I know some of that did get reduced a little bit with the latest deal, but in general, there's still a very different ethic when it comes to what the job entails on both sides, which again has not really affected the overall compensation for FedEx that much.
Yeah, and really, if wages do change, I think Keith had another question here about how it might affect the prices of FedEx routes. Really, it would be if wages change and they're a higher percentage of revenue, then it would bring the NOI down, which would decrease the price. So that's the way we always value. We're always looking at the expenses and the take home, your profitability, and assigning a multiple on that. And so if payroll and wages go up, then NOI would go down, and that's how it would affect things. But right now, we're not seeing a huge trend there. So it would automate, or it would update as soon as price is updated, if that's or as soon as wages updated, if that is the trend. But right now, we're not seeing it. So I think there was a lot of worry when that UPS, when the talks came out that everybody would quit and all try to go to UPS. But one, there's probably those who tried and didn't get it because there's just not that many jobs available. Everybody can't go work for UPS. And two, there's probably some of those that might have gotten those jobs and realized that it was not the job they wanted, just like what Jesse said, where it's significantly harder and longer hours a lot of times than the average FedEx job. Now, Keith has another question. So he sees lots of FedEx routes for sale. Why are they for sale? So one, you may see a lot of routes for sale, but there's over 5,000 contractors in the FedEx space. And so there's always a certain percentage of them that are for sale. That's just kind of a normal part of the business life cycle. The reason that these sell, variety of reasons. So it could be retirement, a lot of times just people who are either retiring completely or retiring to a new industry. They've been doing logistics for 15 years and want to try something else. We often see people who, when you're seeing a sale, that might not mean that the person is actually selling their entire business. They may just be selling a piece. We see a lot of that where they've either grown larger than they want to be, and so they're scaling back, and so they sell a piece of their business, or they may be selling a piece of their business to raise capital, either to reinvest further in their FedEx business, or maybe they're getting into another FedEx or into another logistics business, but they're still keeping a piece of their FedEx business. There's all kinds of reasons. And then sometimes we do see people who have run into some kind of difficulty, whether it's safety or service, and have to get out of the FedEx space because FedEx is going to end their contract. But they do have a timeline where they can turn around and sell those businesses in the future. So next one from Eugene. So what type of loan can you get without collateral, if any, and what % down will I need without collateral? So I'll answer that one. So this is generally banks are going to require collateral. In just about any scenario, they're going to require some kind of collateral. For example, the SBA is typically going to require you to put a lien on your house. That's just going to be a requirement, just about every time. It's very rare that you don't see that. And typically, if there are trucks in the deal, those will be collateral as well. So sometimes you can get away, depending on how valuable the trucks are, how high of a percentage of the total price the value of those trucks are, as the only collateral in the deal. There may be a conventional bank that if you have the right cash, or the price point is right compared to the vehicle fleet, where that's the only collateral they'll need. But it just is going to depend on your financial background and how secure the bank feels with you as to what kind of collateral they'll need. But I would always expect that the trucks are going to be collateral in the deal, and then SBA, you're always going to have to put your primary residence up as well. Now, if it's going to depend on the % down, but I would really say, just general terms, SBA is typically going to require somewhere between 10 and 20%. Usually to get that 10% down, you're typically going to also need 10% in seller financing from the seller, and they will view that as part of your down payment. And then on the conventional side, it's going to be somewhere probably 20-25%. But without collateral, it is going to be a challenge. But I would say typically you can at least have some collateral from the trucks in the deal. Let's go to the next one. It's another one here from actually this one here is from Ed. So he said, he's heard us often say that P&D usually has a manager for every 8 or so routes. What would we typically say for line haul when you should first add a manager?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little bit different question on the line haul side, because your CDL drivers, these are more career drivers on the line haul side. They're for the most part, very self-starter types. And so they're going to be managing most of the aspects of their dispatch and their run themselves. The only time they're really going to need help is if they're held up at a hub somewhere, or they have a breakdown or something like that. So the management needs are a little bit less stringent in terms of per resource, but in general, we're seeing people needing to bring on some management resources around 4 to 5 runs. And that's just sort of a bare minimum, just to have someone available on the phone. It's nothing like on the P&D side where you're correct. We do say 8 to 10 routes you need to bring on a full-time manager. Very different thing. So when I say bring on management on the line haul side, I just mean you need to have somebody doing some oversight. And then on the 8 to 10 on the P&D is you actually need a dedicated non-driving person that is full-time in the operation, doing nothing but taking the phone calls, fielding the texts, talking to FedEx, things like that. Very different asks there depending on which side you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right. I've actually seen a couple people talk about it. What is, how hard is it to find and maintain drivers in line haul?
Yeah, that is the core challenge of line haul. So the good thing about line haul is that, as an industry itself, or as a silo itself, it does not take you having to chase invoices or do your own marketing, trying to drum up that top line revenue. You have an extremely stable fixed revenue stream. Your challenge is putting a butt in a seat to get the miles done. So that is the challenge. And there is a significant shortage of CDL Class A drivers in the United States right now. There are challenges with FedEx line haul, but the good thing about FedEx line haul in particular is that there's a few things that drivers really prefer, not to mention just the FedEx name itself commands a lot of respect among fellow drivers. But specifically with FedEx line haul, it's no-touch freight. It's by and large no-touch freight. It's not that you never have spot runs or city runs or little things here and there, but in general, your big dedicated runs across the country, you're never touching a box. You're literally getting out and hooking up a trailer, double checking everything, doing your inspection process, and then you're driving back. And that's all you do. You're not responsible for making sure that the load is of a certain weight. There's not too many pieces on it. You're responsible for securing the cargo down in the back, making sure the door is shut and sealed, and then you're on your way. So safe driving, and that's really what a lot of drivers like. They like the ability to just basically get in and do the pure act of driving because that's what they're there to do. That's what they're trained to do. So it's not to say that there are not challenges with it, but it's in general, it's got a lot of advantages relative to other similar CDL Class A driving jobs out there.
Yep. Okay. So I'll probably tag in a little bit on this one too, but so let's say we had two businesses. They're both $1 million. So that's just rough size. What is about the amount of time that you would be expected to put into the business on P&D and line haul? Like, you can do P&D and I'll jump to line haul and just give you a break.
Yeah, that again, there's just a huge range of factors that could affect that here, Rick. I would say you need to minimum plan, even if you're remote, 5 to 10 hours a week. And that is if you have really good on-site management there. Now, that's going to be more or less depending on, as I say this in the summits all the time, if you're bringing in a back office skill like payroll or HR or something like that, where you can do some of this without having to hire it out, obviously that's going to be extra hours in your week. But let's say you found a third-party vendor for literally all of this. You are going to need to set a couple hours, I'd say 5 hours if you have everything else taken care of, just to field calls from your BC, calls from FedEx for high-level type issues, renegotiation type stuff. I'd say 5 hours is good. And then if you really want to add a lot more value, that every extra hour you put in, focused in the right place, can actually be a really, really big value add. But if you're looking for really that remote option, yeah, I would not try to ask for less than 5 hours a week.
Yeah. And I think just general rule of thumb, that's expect 10 to 20 and just think that's how you're going to be. And then maybe it turns out it's better, but be able to at least up at that end. As far as line haul goes, it's similar. It's just that there's not ever going to be as much of an in-person requirement there. And, you're not really having to ever handle dispatch, which is oftentimes one of the, even if you're not remote, one of the big time requirements of being in the morning and making sure all the drivers get out, get all their loads sorted properly. That doesn't happen in line haul. They're basically just hooking up to a trailer. So the big things you'd be thinking about in terms of time is, so if you have all dedicated runs, that saves time in and of itself, because with unassigned runs, there's some scheduling you might have to do of making sure that all of your drivers know where to go and that there's all of that handled. Whereas dedicated, they're typically starting in the same spot, going to the same spot and coming back. There's not a lot of scheduling to think about. Spots as well might add some complexity and some scheduling you have to handle as the owner. but let's assume you don't have a manager for line haul. The other things just that can take up time are any kind of calls that you might have to do with the drivers. That really could be the biggest chunk of your time in line haul. A lot of line haul drivers like to talk a lot. So if you don't have someone who can just be there to answer calls and talk to line haul drivers while they're driving, that is probably going to be the biggest thing that eats up your time. But even then, I think you can get away with 10 to 20 hours in a kind of a normal $1 million operation in line haul. Okay, this one here is from Keith. So he read that Amazon has canceled most FedEx shipments. Is this true, and what's the impact? So actually, this is one where I think it was back in 2017 or 18, and where FedEx and Amazon basically separated in terms of FedEx was no longer delivering anything with Amazon, or FedEx didn't have any of Amazon packages on their routes as early as 2017, 2018. So they had already dissolved that partnership. So you shouldn't experience any impact there. FedEx saw that coming from a long ways away, that Amazon was going to be in their lane, and they just decided they would be fine if FedEx delivered everything else. Amazon could have Amazon, and so that's been kind of dissolved for a while now. So that shouldn't have impact on anything that you would experience today. Now, can you compare the ability to grow or scale the various options? So yes, but let's do it at a high level, Jesse. So I'll let you do P&D and line haul. Just kind of talk through scale quickly, and then I'll say the same for Amazon and Brad.
Yeah, so there's really, I say this kind of with an asterisk, but there really is no limit to how big you can grow and scale with P&D and line haul. I mean, we've known contractors that have upwards of 150 routes. There's some that only have 5. And it really depends on how big you want to get. And I will say, to kind of dovetailing into the question about, what's the hours commitment per week? Ironically, one way that you can cut down your weekly hours is to scale up to the point where, as Josh mentioned earlier, you get those economies of scale in your business. You get management that can handle, multiple terminals and stuff like that, where you have different businesses. You can truly be hands off at that point with all but just a very minimal input every single week. And that's really how you would want to do it if you're going to be remote on the P&D side. On the line haul side, your ability to scale is going to be based on a couple things. So, you can buy, so the inorganic growth, you can buy more runs. You can always do that. Or you can just build up a good schedule or a good record of what we call availability. So basically not taking declines on runs that you're contracted to service. Having a good safety score, building up your reputation within the industry, within FedEx, they will start to notice you. And so what will happen is there's a couple ways you can grow organically. Number one is you can bid on more runs. So you can basically use your tractor's good availability score to say, hey, I've got a good, reliable track record here. I want to upgrade this run and use this tractor on another even better, more profitable run. And you can do that. The other way is FedEx will just offer you more runs. And if you have the ability, again, to put a driver in a seat, you will be able to just automatically grow and get that revenue. A lot of those situations, they don't always turn into guaranteed revenue, but for all intents and purposes, even though they don't appear under contract, it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? It's not that they're it's not good that they're not under contract from a sense of you're not making points, you're not building an availability score, but you also don't have any penalty if you don't service. So it's sort of, you're getting sort of revenue with no strings attached to it. So those are kind of the two ways you can grow on the lineups.
Yeah, and so and also just the upper limits for each P&D will have a limit at the terminal level, where you can't be more than a certain percentage of that terminal, but you can keep growing into all the other terminals. And line haul will have a limit at the district level, where you can only be up to 15 runs in a district, but there's 26 districts in the country, and 15 runs is already a pretty large line haul operation. So there's a lot of room to continue to grow there. On the Amazon side, for the most part, most people are still only one contract. There was a time where Amazon allowed people to grow to, really large, and then they've scaled that back some, and they decided for a while they weren't going to let anyone grow above one contract. They've kind of relaxed there as well now. So we're starting to see Amazon allow multiple operations again in different areas. And really, it's going to be based on your track record. And if you can prove that you could operate out of multiple areas, because like I said, for Amazon, a lot of what they care about is knowing that you are there to operate the business. So if you can prove that you can run multiple, the other thing too is that you will be able to grow within your area. And there's higher, I've seen contractors get much larger at a one area size than they do on FedEx. I've seen people get up to 60, 70 routes on the Amazon side in a single area, which is significantly larger than you would ever see in a single terminal for FedEx. So while you may only be one area, you can still get very large, up into the $3-4 million of revenue in a single contract for Amazon. And then for bread, again, growth is going to be a function of, if in your route, if you're adding more stops, or if you're doing more sales at those stops, that's all additional revenue to you. And if you get to the point where you can't fulfill it all with one truck, then you can move to add a second route, add a second driver, and work in that way too. You can also always buy additional contracts in the same way. There's no scale limits there. It's all about your area and how much you're capable of doing. And as long as you're capable of doing it, there's no stopping you or slowing you down there. So we're close to the end here, so I'm going to rapid fire a lot of these questions and answered. So Ron asks, in the bread industry, what are some truck requirements? There aren't any. It's basically whatever are the best trucks for you to get the bread out. So a lot of people use step vans like you are used to in the FedEx space. There's just, you don't really have to brand them. Some people do. There is some payments around it, but you don't have to, and that can vary bakery to bakery as well in terms of what options are there. But there's no real requirements other than that it has to be able to hold all the bread.
Yeah, 4 wheels, a roof, and an engine, and you get the bread there. It's all you need.
And those routes are also much lower mileage. So especially those of you who are already in a space and adding on bread, that might be a way to put a vehicle out that maybe you weren't planning on, maybe it was going to be a spare or wouldn't be able to run full time on one of your longer FedEx routes, but you could put it on a bread route and it'd be completely fine. So that might be a way for you to move vehicles around too. Revenue average for bread routes. So big range here. So I'll tell you what we've seen just so that you kind of have that to think through. But again, there's some variance there when it comes to bakery, but we've seen everything from 150,000 to 950,000. And some, oftentimes we're talking about a route here, but the majority are going to fall between about 375 and 750. So there can be some really high revenue routes in the bread space. Now, a lot of what you'll see when you see valuations is the amount that they do per week. That's really the big number for bread, is their weekly revenue. And so that's the number you're typically going to see. And you're typically going to see a multiple of the weekly revenue is how a price comes to. And so in different industries, there are different ratios that are standard. So for bimbo bakeries, it's around a 13. And then there's some others that are higher than around a 20. So there's some nuance there that if you're looking at bread, we can go really deep on all the bakeries and talk it through with you from the different listings perspective. But just at a high level, those are kind of revenue ranges to expect. And then, like I said, I see margin ranges, everywhere from like the 13-14% range up to the 40% range. If you are thinking about a traditional logistics space, there are just very, very few expenses required here. There's none of the technology requirements. There's none of the insurance requirements, really. And a lot of the routes are really low mileage, so fuel is pretty cheap as well. So it's almost just the cost to pay the driver, and then some repair and maintenance on your single truck is really what you're thinking about. Now let me see, which ones of these can I get to quickly? So quickly from Mike, the $75,000 indemnity on line haul and $10,000 on P&D, is that a maximum annually or a maximum per incident that you could be liable for from an indemnification cost?
Yeah, great question, Mike. I'm glad you asked me that. I did not clear that up. That is per incident. So yeah, like I said, that is related to how serious those tractor incidents are. It's not good press at all for FedEx, and they are I'll just put it this way. They're not messing around when it comes to making sure that these liability costs are covered. And now you're running under their motor carrier authority. So you're not going to get hit as a contractor with a multi-million-dollar judgment that comes down from, a daytime TV lawyer that sues your company. And FedEx is going to absorb that. But the bottom line is FedEx is very, very, very serious about protecting their brand and keeping those liability costs as mitigated as possible. So yeah, that's $75,000 and the $10,000, that is per incident.
Yeah, and it's important to note that you're only in those high tiers if you have basically messed up in some way, where either you didn't do the right technology standards, you didn't follow through with the safety training you were supposed to. So most people should not be in those tiers. No, they should not be at that level of indemnification. It should be that you're nowhere near that. You're at the kind of the $2,000 range at max. So that is where most people are. That is how the standards are set. It's basically FedEx saying, if you're not following these obligations, this isn't a joke, like this is the amount that you're going to be liable for, just like Jesse's saying. Current multiples between FedEx and Amazon. So FedEx side, we're still seeing it's basically between about a 4 and a 4.5 multiple. And that's been standard for most of this year. We've seen it fluctuate as high as 5 over the past couple of years. I would say right now, in particular, one of the biggest things that's driving the current multiples is the lending environment. With interest rates being really high, banks are not going to lend much above a 4 point. They're not going to lend above a 4.5, and it's difficult. You have to see really strong financials even to get up to 4.5. So that's driving a lot of it. I would expect that to hold steady until interest rates come down, and then there might be some potential for multiple expansion. But for now, that's kind of what we've seen this year and what I would expect while inflation is at these current rates. Amazon, it basically, think about it as FedEx, but lower multiple. So you may see some deals where it could get as high as the 4 multiple again, but I'd say it's more often that they're kind of in that 3 multiple range for Amazon. And then a last one here from Daryl, which is a really good question. With bread routes, do you lay out the money for the product? So it's going to be, again, this is one where it still varies bakery to bakery. So you're never going to be just, paying money for all the bread, but they kind of account for it in different ways. So some of them will basically just deliver the bread to you that you order, and then you just get a percentage of any of the product sales. Some of them, like Mission, we say bread, but it actually includes a lot of things. So Mission tortillas is another type of bread route that we're talking about. But the way Mission does it is you'll basically have an account that'll be debited based on how much product you order. And then it'll it'll credit you based on the sales. And so that's the way it works with different ones. So it's just a function of how they decide to do the accounting. But it's not one where you're just, paying money every week for the bread. It's more of just the way that the system accounts for it. Okay, so we rapid fired a lot there. I have one here from Keith that I'll answer. So how does a large geographic area impact cost and profitability? So that's a really broad question, hard to answer quickly. So I probably shouldn't have chosen as my last one. But the way to think about it is if you're saying a large area in that, let's say you work for a terminal where your routes are really far away. And so that's what we would classify as rural. If you're driving hundreds of miles away from the terminal, that can be one where your repair and maintenance and your CapEx on your vehicles is going to be higher because you're always having to turn over those vehicles and your fuel is going to be higher. FedEx should be accounting for that in their contracts. They should be paying you so that it comes out to a similar profitability. But it is important to just be thinking through those factors. Now, if you're saying a large area in that I've built up a large business, and so I'm at multiple terminals, there's efficiencies of scale that come from that. And that things like Jesse was talking about, you can have more back office to take time away from what you would have to do and spread it out and achieve some efficiencies there. You'll also have the benefit of having, you could have 20 extra drivers and 20 extra trucks. That would feel like way too many trucks if you only had 10 routes. But if you have 100 routes, that might feel like an appropriate number, and you can use them as you need across all of your business. So there's a lot of efficiencies of scale that come from there. It just depends on what you mean by having a large area, but there's all kinds of things we could talk about there, and it would really just be kind of a pro-con list based on specific instances and examples if you wanted to talk through those. Okay, we're right at 4:30. I think that's all the questions answered. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jesse, for being here and talking through all this. I know that we talked through a ton today, so if you have questions about any of the different spaces or listings that we mentioned today, just reach out to our team. We can answer any of those questions and help point you in the right direction, hopefully help clarify for you today what might be the next step for you to take. But I know that oftentimes it still is going to require a further conversation. So reach out to our team and we'd be happy to talk about your specific situation and how to take the next step into the logistics space. And again, thanks everybody for joining today. We will see you next week on another webinar here at Route Consultant.